Well, thank you very much for the lovely introduction. I don't even know if you know that, but your scene you brought from Hungary all those years ago was the very first 3D scene I ran on a commercial large-scale volume. So we go a while back, and I have to be honest, it didn't look good at that point, and you were very gentle with me, so thanks for giving me a soft start into my professional career. All right, before I do any more introduction in that sense, I want to show you what we've been up at Fireframe for the last couple of years. So enjoy a quick clip. Oop, not that, but here. All right, that should give you a tiny taste. Thank you. Indeed. Yeah, Fireframe has been around for a while now. I had the incredible honor of joining the team end of last year after freelancing, but we'll come to that in a bit. But we are at a really, really exciting time in our company structure and general line of vision we're currently working with. And as actually, we now shifted from just being a service provider for virtual production to actually become a full movie studio. So we have a fully funded slate for the next 3 years. We have 3 productions in development, and we start principles of photography of that at the end of this year. So yeah, hopefully we'll see quite a lot of us in the future, and hopefully see some Fireframe studios in some of the big screens you go to. All right, yeah, this is us. We're a team of around 20 people now, up in Finland, the happiest country in the world. As you can see, by default. It might also be a bit misleading because that was before the Christmas party, so, you know, there's also an incentive to be happy. But yeah, so we're quite big. We are a team of artists, producers, and general visionaries, so we come from all across the industry, which is quite exciting. And our crew has worked with the really biggest names all across the world in Century. So this is quite exciting because that brings the experience from like the very, very top level of gaming to the top level of film production to even music production and everything under one roof. And that's where kind of the creativity happens. And we try to create a bit of a bubble around this to actually nurture this creativity and move it forward and have a really, really good time with the stuff we're doing. To myself, before I got to join Fireframe, I had the pleasure of working on a couple of really cool productions. Namely, there's a couple of my favorites ones. We're going to dive in them a bit later. And then as well, I didn't only do film production, but I got to work in a lot of studios around the world. And actually, it's quite exciting because a lot of the people I've done this project with are here. We have like from Malak in Mexico, I've done with Urs from Evoke, and then we have the ZARK in Zurich. Something in Belgium, and then all around the world essentially, and then namely the most important one, of course, Fireframe in the bottom right, which is now the latest project. What I want to dive into today is not just film production, though. I want to explore virtual production. So Riz, thank you very much for setting the stage for that one. That's a perfect transition. What we're looking at basically at Fireframe is not only the film production, but we want to get into the cross-media world. Because what we notice is that like film, gaming, and all of those kind of live events start to use the same tool set of actual virtual production tools. So there's quite a natural gateway to actually access live events, VR, AI, games, VFX, without starting from the very, very bottom, which is quite exciting. And that's actually what I've been doing for the last couple years as well. So I got to explore quite a lot around of this flower, and now I get to bring the experience to Fireframe, and then we can start with that there. So one of the first things, obviously, I want to look at is film, TV, and advertising, and kind of what tool sets do we actually use? Because, of course, we hear a lot of the Unreal Engine, which is one of our core parts there, but there's also a lot of other things out there. So starting and looking back a bit at one of my first major productions I've done, Poor Things, which was quite cool, won a couple Oscars, BAFTAs, and a lot of other awards, so yay. But it was quite ridiculous because we had a 60-meter by 10-meter LED wall down there, and that was in 21, so there wasn't a lot of experience around how to run those kind of things. So what we ended up doing is basically, and we had a lot of other challenges as well. We had about a month of lead time. Originally, the system was quite convoluted, so there was the American production, which hired a Hungarian service production, which then hired a local hardware provider, Vision Team at that point, which then hired Visual Humans and Tech, who did the actual like LED wall setup and handled a lot of the logistics, which then in return hired ICT, the company I was working at, and that's how I got onto the set. So a very, very big circle. But in the end, I actually got to run the entire volume. Both of our Pixera operators got COVID. I handled all the interaction between the VFX supervisor, the DOP, and everything like that. So naturally, I kind of slid it into the role of the VP supervisor, and it was quite kind because the production actually asked me to give me the credit afterwards. So I'm really, really proud of that one. We had a bunch of challenges. We shot on analog film as well, so that was fun. We had the massive LED wall and everything like that. And just to give you a sense of the scale, it was ridiculously big. So this was the first time I saw an LED one behave a bit like a curtain, because it was hung from the ceiling. When the big gates opened, it did like a bit of a wave, which is not the thing you want to see your LED wall doing, to be honest. But the immersion was absolutely incredible, and the actual look of it was awesome. And if you see the movie, everything in the ship was filmed in front of that LED wall. But technically, the setup wasn't that complicated looking back. It was a huge challenge then, but not as hard as you might think it was originally. So we used Pixera as a playback engine because we did everything pre-rendered as 2D. The resolution was a bit massive. It was about 24,000 pixels in width and I think 4,000 something in height. And we had a bit of slack so we could shift the horizon up and down. And the LED wall followed the entire shape of the LED wall. Ship, sorry. And then we had a Rosendahl sync, which is a fairly rudimentary sync generator, I would call it at that point, and used infinite panels. And there was not much in between. We had an LED processor. But basically, we had a playback software, a synchronization, and an output software. So that's not quite spectacular. And then looking at other productions as well, finally, because that was ridiculously big, obviously, so very few productions can afford that or need that, to be very honest. And I was quite excited now in the last couple of years that people are actually starting using that one. So that was done by Lux Machina, and that was Red Notice for Netflix, and I got the pleasure to work with Markus Förder, the DOP on there, and he's super clever about it because, as you notice, the LED wall only follows the actual anamorphic aspect ratio, so he really optimized this entire thing. And then going even smaller, for example, what I like quite a bit, because you have a small volume here, but this is the killer on Netflix, and they used a very, very tiny amount of LED as well. And just to show you how little the actual setup was, it's basically smaller than the one stuff that is here, and you did a big scale movie with it. But then speaking of small, a very unique use case as well, New Demands, was a production we've done called Martina, which was completely done in miniatures. And it was super fun because we had the complete sets built in the foreground. There was an amazing Mexican production, Detachment East. They built all the miniatures in Mexico and then shipped them over, but they didn't want to ship them in normal flight crates, so they put them all into suitcases. So when they arrived at the airport, they had like a huge bunch of suitcases. But it looked absolutely incredible what they've put together. And then we put that in front of the LED wall, scaled the end-display config accordingly to their actual plans, and got a really, really nice output. And the idea behind this is because the time-consuming part in a miniature shoot is essentially animating a character every frame. So that's the part they want to do in CG, but they get all the background plates ready to shoot within 3 weeks. So they have the full backgrounds, everything already here. And can now produce fully animate, basically a full stop-motion look movie with the actual truth behind it within a year, which is quite incredible when you usually look at the 5-year span you have. But again, as well, so here it is not that special. Basically, we use a fairly commonly known tool set of it. So here we use, of course, the Unreal Engine in the background because we need the parallax, the scaling, and everything like that. But essentially, that is our playback engine. Then we have OptiTrack as a tracking system to compensate for the actual perspective of the entire thing, and then another sync generator, so nothing spectacular there. But you notice you will find a certain pattern when you look at the productions like these, that they are repetitive in terms of technology. I like that Catherine pointed out that every production is different because that's the case, but the tools that we have available can be used in very unique ways, and that's where the magic comes from. Another thing, basically, another tool set in that sense, and that's now a later use of essentially 2D material. So this is going back to a bit to what we've done with the Poor Things one, but a bit more advanced. So this is basically Constellation, an Apple TV show that originally actually shot up in Finland, but I got to do the reshoots in Berlin, which was quite fun because the main talent didn't want to go up to Finland anymore because if you know anything, Finland in winter is not the most comfortable place to be at. So we did it in the studio, and then it ended up being too warm. So that was, balances. But it looked quite amazing because that's simple 2D backgrounds with just a slight horizon adjustment. And again, you see we have Pixera, another tracking system, and a bit more modern sync in there. So all of a sudden we have this very repetitive set of films. And one last production I want to point out, so you see basically we have all of those things ready, is one that Fireframe did, which is quite nice, called Icebreaker. Believe it or not, snow and cold is a big theme in Nordic productions. But it was quite nice because there essentially it is playing on a stranded icebreaker, and it's kind of this horror movie where one crew member goes crazy. But during the shoot, they actually fall through the ice in the North Pole, which is obviously not something you can do somewhere realistically. So either you have to rent a pool and build an actual ice cap and do everything around there, which ends up with a lot of post-production, or you do it in a studio, as we did it, and you saw kind of the foreground that is quite limited. So we basically built a pool and everything before that. So quite exciting times. But also here, basically a very repeatable set. So quite similar. So why I'm writing on those different tool sets, so you understand the tools. Let's look into another production I got to do, and that's quite exciting. So I got to go with Breda Studios to the Esports World Cup in the Middle East. And it is quite interesting because I would have never thought I can do anything like that because it's a very different industry. But actually, when you look at it closely, you know all the elements already there. So what we ended up doing is essentially building fairly big stages. So there were 3 main stages. Those are 2 of those. And then a lot of control rooms or like moderator booths, so 8 individual moderator booths. And it looks quite nice because like you end up using the same tools again. So for example, what you see here is a combination of output on the LED wall in the background, a lighting show. And then in the foreground, you have a lot of AR elements. And those are really done in Unreal Engine. So animated in Unreal Engine, the perspective is done in Unreal Engine. And it's just basically composited on top of the original footage. So all of a sudden you have a tracking tool, you have a playback engine, and you have an output tool. And you know how to use all of those tools, so you can start putting them together in very, very unique ways, and that's quite interesting. The only thing you have to be very open is that industries work differently in terms of planning, system, and everything like that. While the film industry might be a bit more, let's call it, general with system plannings. A live event is usually very, very thoroughly drawn out, especially with that one. But it is quite cool how you start to integrate those things. So once you have the AR elements going, you start piping video feeds into the AR elements. So this is the actual live game feed that is already happening. And within the broadcast, the camera operator sees their return channel, can fly into the actual world, the digital world, and then operate in there, basically as they would do in a very, very fantastical set. And the cool thing is about that one, again, you see a lot of repeating tool sets. So one different thing we used here is stage position, which is essentially a really, really great middleware, where it translates signals from one software to another software. And it's quite interesting to actually blend those things together. And they have an amazing plugin to actually do all the camera distortions. But then you see Unreal Engine again, everything for the AR element. And if you've done VP, the AR is a bit of a, in my opinion, sometimes a bit of an easier task. So that's quite nice. Then you have Disguise, a media server, and the Stipe system. So we had about 7 tracked cameras in every studio. And that's how we managed to kind of do this intercutting live. But the only thing that was way different than the film industry is this one was much bigger, so there was a lot more hardware. So even in the studios, I had 27 PCs that kind of linked together to just do that one, because in that one we also used end display, as opposed to basically here where there's additional, I think, 9 PCs in every studio. So there was just a lot of hardware that we had to operate with. And then one more thing, basically, going completely away from film production now, this is where the magic of virtual production happens, and something I wasn't thinking about that point, was essentially a show I also got to do with Bright, and that's a mixed reality game for an ice hockey break thing in a new stadium. So very, very different from film production, and I originally was like, well, do you really think I'm the right person for that? And I was like, yeah, we want to have a translator between the tech and creative, and that's essentially what I do in film production as well, so I got to integrate quite easily into that one. But that one is quite exciting, essentially. I really like, let me just quick play again on that one. It's quite cool because essentially what happened there is you had a stadium app where you can configure basically your own ball. This ball then gets fired through a web server onto the big LED cube in the middle, falls down, and then in the mixed reality glasses, the ball that has fallen down through the nail board is shooting at the people into the middle, and they have to defend essentially a hole in the middle. And then it's becoming a stadium against player situation, which is quite exciting. Yep. Right. Sorry. Here we go. Yeah, exactly like that. And of course, I got to do a small element. But again, we had Unreal Engine, which was used to actually do the mixed reality integration there. We had a tracking system, which in return wasn't the tracking system itself, but the actual glasses in here. The pillars you see were used for localization, so the glasses actually knew where they go. Again, stage position to handle all the data in between, and then an AWS server, which is a new element. I haven't done that one before. And then, of course, I didn't do that alone. I had like an amazing team around me to actually do the hard work and coding because I'm no software developer. But again, you can translate between those layers because you learned that stuff. And the cool thing is, yeah, exactly. And the cool thing is now, if you look at virtual production in that sense, you end up noticing that there's a lot of similarities across industries where you can help diversify your entire production. And going back, doing the loop to a film production is actually one little thing I got to do with Final Pixel was the launch campaign in London for Rebel Moon, which is quite exciting because the thought process behind that one was quite clever in our opinion, because once you already have your assets into an actual shared database, you can reuse them for new interactions in that sense. So what they've done is essentially they've shot on a virtual production stage for Rebel Moon, I think in Los Angeles. Don't quote me on that, might be. But what they then did is a fairly big launch campaign all around the world, and we got to do the London part, what you see on the top left. And that one was quite cool because basically the idea was to produce a trailer for people with themselves in it. So they invited a bunch of influencers, Zack Snyder come by, that was quite cool. And they basically got to go on a stage. We got 2 shots of them. We recorded them right away. Offloaded them into editing software. They cut together the trailer with the actual people in there. And within 3 minutes, an influencer or like a very important person had a customized trailer for Rebel Moon with themselves in it, which obviously they posted because you know who doesn't want to be in an actual cinema trailer. But the actual cost and the effort it took to start out on this kind of production is a lot lower than when I start to actually think about how to build this from scratch. Because if I have to build a 3D scene from scratch, if I had to rent a studio of a certain size to then pull up the other shots and everything like that, the cost explodes all of a sudden, and then this marketing becomes quite unattractive. But for this, the only cost, so to speak, was the rent for the place and the crew operating the actual scene. So it is quite exciting. And then, of course, you can reuse all the visuals, textures, and everything else you have for projection mapping, big scale kind of marketing, 3D, basically 3D websites or like more interactive stuff around there, or like even immersive experiences. So that's a really, really unique position to be in when you actually understand it. And that's now what we try to do at Fireframe. So we now try to actually do all of that. It is not a small little task. It's actually a quite significant task. But it is quite cool because now we get to think about movies in their entirety. So we go from pitch deck to release. And we also get to redesign the entire pre-production process and the thought process, how we approach movies to actually produce them in a more secure, more interesting, and a more, hopefully, innovative way than other studios are able to. And then also, once we have a movie and have an IP and have an idea, and I really like the Fallout over here, you can benefit and transport them into different media quite easily, quote unquote. But for example, looking at Fallout, that one will repollinate the actual first idea you had. So you build a universe around your characters and worlds without having to retell the same story in different industries, but you actually benefit from the same base. And that's one, and that should be quite exciting. And you saw it during Fallout, like when the series released, all of the old Fallout games came into top 10 charts worldwide, and were played again, were like super popular, so it was really, really nice. And of course, we use our game engine as our core technology, but we also look into the AI methodology. So we try out quite a bit how do we integrate them as an actual tool into virtual production and into our entire production process without like leading to a copyrighted material, which is a whole topic in itself, and always keeping the artist in control and in the software they feel comfortable with. So that's basically where we try to explore and move stuff forward. But yeah, now we have, at the Fireframe, we have a fully funded production slate. We have 3 movies in development. 2 of those have cross-media potential. So we're already exploring different steps and angles, how to transport them into existing platforms, movies, and things like that. All of them have major VP potential. That's the one thing we will have to do, or like what a Fireframe original will look like. And we will want to shoot them about half in the studios. And we're not looking for scripts that basically, or like we're not trying to shoehorn any scripts into our existing technology, but actually find the scripts that are great for that one and have the right people attached to it so they are open for producing in a new and exciting way. And all of them will be end-to-end produced in-house, meaning that we will have a huge say in how and what goes, and also we're the ones to blame if something doesn't go wrong. So that's the good stuff in that sense, so we're quite privileged for that one. But yeah, so essentially that should give you a bit of an overview, a quick like general view of how virtual production looks out. Huge thank you. Feel free to reach out to me or also under me down here, my partner in crime and our head of production. So please, yeah, I hope you enjoyed it and yeah.